The Great Pyramids of Giza are a universally recognized symbol of ancient Egypt. But the Nile Valley was home to one more of the 7 wonders of the world. The Lighthouse of Alexandria was built in the 3rd century BCE, closer to the completion of the Eiffel Tower than to the tomb of Khufu. It was the symbol of a mighty commercial empire whose rulers preferred to speak their native Greek tongue. Last time we talked about dynastic Egypt. The second chapter deals with a very different state, one in which elements of the Egyptian culture merged with those brought in by Middle Eastern and European conquerors. Egypt in the early 1st millennium BCE is a source of inspiration for the younger neighbors. The Nubian rulers are building pyramids, not as big as those of Giza, but just as elaborate. The Greeks create their own mythology borrowing from those around them, including Egypt. The noble families of the Eastern Mediterranean imitate Egyptian sarcophagi. But the country itself is going through the rough times. Throughout the 3rd intermediate period, a struggle between several pretenders to the role of single monarch continues in Egypt, while a powerful opponent, the Neo-Assyrian Empire, forms in the east. Its invasion marks the first conquest of ancient Egypt by a foreign empire and the conversion into a subordinate province. The Assyrian conquest was a severe blow, and its effects would be felt for many centuries. It marks the beginning of the late period of the ancient nation's history. Assyria ruled in the Nile Valley only for a short time. The empire was struck by a dynastic crisis and the subsequent unrests. Taking advantage of the turbulence, the former vassals united against the common enemy. The Assyrian proxy in Egypt, the Said dynasty, was instrumental in forging an alliance of nations against the conquerors, their expulsion, and was able to maintain power over the weakened Egyptian state. Among its achievements was the adoption of the Demotic script, the Egyptian alphabet. Hieroglyphs and their simplified form, the hieratic script, could still be used in religious texts and official announcements. The main focus of the dynasty revolved around trade and an effort to forge new networks to replace those that had been lost a few centuries before. They began the creation of the Canal of the Pharaohs, which would link the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. The Greek mariners received a whole port town at their disposal, Naucratis. The city supplied Egypt with timber and silver, wine and olive oil, as well as offered easy access to the services of Greek mercenaries. Mercenaries served as a state police and dealt with the hostile tribes in the area, but they were not ready to face a real army. A century and a half after the liberation from the Assyrians, before Egypt could fully recover from the injuries, it encountered another Middle Eastern empire, Persia. The Battle of Pelusium resulted in the imprisonment of Psammetichus III, the fall of the last significant indigenous dynasty of the Egyptian pharaohs, and the beginning of the 200 years of Persian rule. Darius I managed to secure a reputation of a friend of Egypt. Yet even during his rule, the Canal of the Pharaohs was used to move Egyptian architects and construction workers to the Persian cities. The situation had only worsened under his successors. Ceased the funding of the Egyptian temples, and the active promotion of Zoroastrianism began. Egypt was also obliged to provide food and soldiers for the Persian army. During the dynastic crisis in Persia, Egypt rebelled, and the country gained independence for a brief time. But a power struggle between the Egyptian pretenders to the throne allowed the Persians to regain control of what they referred to as a rebellious province. This time they had no mercy. Egyptian cities were sacked, fortifications destroyed, sacred Egyptian scriptures were seized and burned. Egyptians considered themselves humiliated, so they welcomed the unification of Greece and the start of the campaign of Alexander the Great against the common nemesis. When the young commander scored a surprise victory at the Battle of Issus and turned to fly the Persian king and his supporters, including many Egyptians loyal to the Persian throne, numerous Egyptian generals and regional strongholds switched sides and helped him overcome obstacles on the journey to Egypt. Here he was hailed as the liberator. His coronation marks the beginning of the Hellenistic or Greek period of the history of ancient Egypt. Alexander adopted the title of pharaoh and laid the foundations of the future city of Alexandria. Then he left Egypt to continue his campaign against Persia and never returned, dying shortly after the conclusion of his epic campaign. The empire did not outlive its founder for long and was divided among his former lieutenants. Egypt became the domain of the Ptolemaic dynasty. The Greek Macedonian population self-isolated within the 3 Greek city-states on the territory of Egypt. but welcomed wealthy and educated natives willing to learn a new language and embrace a foreign culture. Local traditions were encouraged as long as they helped to sustain power. For instance, the depictions of the Ptolemies as Egyptian pharaohs, the association between the Greek and Egyptian deities. The Greeks did not reject the native religion. On the contrary, they built temple complexes unrivaled by any other built in the Nile Valley in the last 1,000 years. The Greeks respected knowledge. Their work preserved information about the inconvenient rulers, the first female pharaoh, the heretic pharaoh, and his son. They copied old scientific and literary texts, and the Ptolemaic edicts in all the official languages of the state provided the key to deciphering the ancient Egyptian script. But only the first Ptolemies were popular among the non-Greek population. Ptolemy I held the reputation of being a major figure of the Alexander campaigns against Persia. His Egypt turned into the dominant power of the Mediterranean. He had allies in the Balkans and Asia Minor. His son and grandson forged strong ties with Rome, which depended on Egyptian food supplies, and built the world-famous library and lighthouse of Alexandria, symbols of the intellectual and commercial might of the Ptolemaic Egypt. Their descendants retained only some control over the trade routes, primarily due to the actions of the Seleucids, the Macedonian dynasty of the neighboring Hellenistic states, and the rapid growth of the Roman Republic. In the 1st century BCE, the relationships between Alexandria and Rome changed. The latter provided endless loans to the Egyptian rulers and intervened in internal conflicts to prevent the collapse of the food supply. The Egyptian question became a real issue. The last of the Ptolemies, the famous Cleopatra, did all she could to restore the dynasty to its former glory. Julius Caesar helped her regain control over Egypt before he was stabbed to death by the fellow senators. Mark Antony promised to hand over part of Rome's eastern territories and to rule together. The plan did not come to fruition. His rival managed to declare Antony an enemy of the Republic and smashed his forces at the Battle of Actium. The last of the Ptolemies and her lover committed suicide to avoid public humiliation and execution, while Egypt became a province of Rome. The fall of the Macedonian dynasty did not result in any radical changes for Egypt. Greek remained the second language of the Roman Empire, and the inhabitants of the Greek cities in Egypt were among the first to be granted Roman citizenship. For another 2.5 centuries, the ruling emperor also assumed the title of a pharaoh, and many local religious centers were founded even after the spread of the Abrahamic religions. By the end of the 1st century CE, Alexandria had become the world center of Judaism and soon enough one of the 3 main Christian areas. The Roman province of Egypt was a key port of the East, a major supplier of food and second only to Italy in its wealth. It was guarded by elite legions, yet it was still an obvious target for those wishing to undermine the position of Rome. The most successful internal opponent was Zenobia, the Syrian ruler of Palmyra, who had conquered Egypt during the crisis of the 3rd century. Just a couple years later, Emperor Aurelian defeated the rebellious queen and regained control of the conquered lands. But this event, coupled with numerous clashes between the supporters of different religions, put an end to the image of Alexandria as the informal capital of the East. That place will be taken by Constantinople. The Persian Empire of the Sassanid dynasty posed an external threat. Both Rome and Persia dreamed of the great victory in the Big War and the formation of the empire of an unseen size. As early as in the 3rd century CE, it was noticeable that their confrontation did not spread beyond a fairly small region on the border. Nevertheless, the conflict continued for several centuries and only worsened after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. The last 2 wars were particularly brutal. Their impact on the 2 empires of the ancient world is comparable to that of the world wars on continental Europe or China in the 20th century. Exhausted states whose leaders had lost any respect of the people turned out to be the ideal targets for the young Arab Caliphate. Its invasion into the Nile Delta marks the beginning of the history of modern Egypt. Remember I mentioned the heretic pharaoh. One day we'll talk about him in particular and the religion of ancient Egyptians in general. The easiest way to support the project is to give it a thumb up and subscribe to the channel to let me know that I am on the right way. Even better if you can share the link with your friends. If you're feeling generous, you can look up my Patreon page, buy me a coffee, or check one of the sponsors of the channel, products I personally use or used in the past and can wholeheartedly recommend. Thanks for your attention and have a great day.